Let's kick this off. So Josh, this is, the podcast, we're bringing all these high level strength coaches by Samson. I think this is an awesome thing because as people get to watch that or listen to it, they get to hear all these different perspectives. And so I think yours is great for this podcast because it brings a very unique, you have the very high level strength and conditioning background for where, with the Bulls and with Purdue, and I'll let you talk on that. But now you're like, I know we talked before, hopefully off air, but what y'all are doing is the future, which is awesome name of the company, but I think y'all are going in the right direction. So give me in 3 minutes or less ish, give us a brief background on you.
Yeah. So, my background, how kind of I started my journey was, like probably a lot of us in this field, young kid, grew up, Jordan era, loved the Bulls, diehard Bulls fan. You couldn't tell me any different. I was going to play for the Bulls one day, and cool. Kind of held on to that dream way longer than really I should have. Because I wasn't, in my mind, I was a good basketball player, but in reality, I really wasn't. But that kind of led me down my path of falling in love with the process of, the work and how you go about not just the skill development piece, but actually like training. I began from the time I was in grade school, middle school. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was like sneaking into the weight room at the Y, like using the old Nautilus machines and like going out and running, 5+ miles, like, cause I thought it was going to help me get better at basketball.
Right. Yeah, of course. You didn't know any better.
Everything I did was completely wrong but I, through that journey, I was also smart enough to kind of realize, if somehow I didn't play for the Bulls, like, I should probably have a backup plan. And so then, late high school, early college is when I came to the realization that side of it, like training, and sports performance, was a real job, so from that time, I started studying people who were in the positions that I hope to one day get to, and just, what was their journey? What were the commonalities? What were the outliers? All those sorts of things to start crafting the path to one day get there. It was just a series of, one relationship leads to the next, one opportunity leads to the next. If, you make the most of it. And so that led to right out of college, I was able to intern for the Bulls, which even just that, like being an unpaid intern was my dream job, So for me at 22, like I had made it professionally, like I was good, and so even then it caused me to start thinking bigger, because leading up to that time through college, the sort of goal I had set for myself was, by the time I'm 35, I'll be, not just head NBA, high major, Division I college basketball strength coach, but I'll be in a position where I could get any job that opened up, cool. And so that was my goal. And now I'm 22, and really, again, even as an intern, that's kind of my dream. And, fast forward a season later, I took some time. Between that season I interned, the next season, I traveled in Australia a little bit. I spent some time at Australian Institute of Sport with the coaches out there. Came back. I spent some time in Minnesota with Cal Dietz. After that, I went and worked with Mike Boyle. I worked for Mike Boyle for about 8-9 months in Boston. And then the assistant role with the Bulls opened up. And so they called me back. And so I ended up spending the next 3 seasons there as the assistant. And at the end of that 3rd season, actually got a phone call from Mike Boyle where he was like, hey, I don't know where your head's at, what your next move is, but I've just recommended you for the director position with Purdue men's basketball. And super cool. Ended up, ended up there through Mike. Spent the next 7 seasons there, and towards the tail end of that last season, as I was thinking about, really I was building a path to one day, in my mind, it was one day become the general manager of an NBA team. So actually, I thought I was about to go to law school. I was all set taking LSAT. All of this. My plan was I was going to go to law school, and then whatever city I ended up, because I had 7 different schools I was deciding between. I had it lined up where I was going to be able to work in the front office for the NBA team in that city, just through, my relationships and that. And that was my plan. And then out of nowhere, I got an email and started getting recruited, got sourced for this role with Future, where, where I am now. And it was just one of those things where, it was, I think the timing for it was right, but also it was an opportunity so much bigger than, at least at the time, really what I was visioning. As ambitious as it was, as crazy as it was, where I was like, I'm going to be the GM of an NBA team one day. This was something that, had an opportunity to be so much bigger, but even short of that, even in like, quote unquote, fail, like even if this thing failed, it was like, by going and doing this, even just for 1 year, I'm going to grow 5 years professionally, and everything I thought I was going to get from law school, this experience is going to be that, sort of on steroids. So it's like, even if this fails, it's going to put me in a better position if I did decide I still want to become a GM one day. But then what success looks like for us is literally we've changed the world. We've brought 100%. Preventative healthcare, and now we've helped millions and millions of people live, not only better lives, more fulfilled, higher quality lives, but longer, lives. And
for sure.
So that was, now 3 years ago, and kind of whole new world, as you might imagine, from basketball and strength and conditioning to startup and tech and Silicon Valley, and all that. So.
And I think that's as we talked off air before, I think that's so huge. Having me now in the strength and conditioning world, however, having a doctorate in physical therapy, y'all are like, this is changing the world. It could change the medical world as well. Injury prevention, your insurance costs, your surgeries, because all these things are being taken care of on the front end. I think it's huge, but you're very unique in, you also have that huge other background with professional teams. Collegiate. I think that's super cool. So, well, let's go into you kind of from the coaching role, and then also from the management side. But so what motivates you as a coach, and then how do you turn around and motivate your staff? And I think this question is kind of a dual role, because I think some of it's, future and how you manage your coaches, but then also for some of our listeners, if you back at Purdue, how did you motivate your staff there as well? Because I would assume it's a little different, but you correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes and no. In some ways, I think it's the environment obviously is a little bit different. I think the one thing that's probably consistent across both, and it's, I think anybody that that knows me, anybody that's worked with me throughout the years, whether it be going back to my time with the Bulls, to Purdue, to now with Future, is I've sort of always lived my life with this mentality of, and I had this mantra with like several of our players at Purdue, and several colleagues and people that that I've worked together with, is this mantra of like color outside the lines. And so not just looking at paths that exist currently, from a standpoint of like, when people talk about like, what do I ultimately want to do, in terms of, say, my career, I think so often we're just looking at like what exists today. And it's such a limiting thing, and especially in today's world with technology, like we're in a space with technology, and and actually a book that I would strongly recommend for anyone interested in kind of learning more about like what's coming ahead, and almost sort of like the fantasy of like almost like science fiction that we've seen in movies. Like you think like The Minority Report and all these movies where actually some of those things now exist, and the things that are coming ahead The book I'd recommend is called The Inevitable, by Kevin Kelly, and it talks about the convergence of all of these accelerating technologies happening all at the same time. And so that's where you look at, even just over the course of this next decade, even over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, what it looks like, we can't fathom. Like our brains have developed over time through evolution, to think in a linear fashion. And we're at a point in our history where it's exponential. So that's why, like, you know, in 3 years from now, in hindsight, you know, we all kind of go, oh yeah, like, sure, like, you know, whatever like a driverless car or whatever.
Right.
But when you really think about it, you can't, you know, we sort of can't process kind of what's possible. So I think for me, it started with that framework of the, you know, both coaches that I've worked with and beyond coaching, just people I've worked with in general, as well as, you know, our players, is to not, you know, like one of the things I talk about it with a lot of people I've worked with and coached is, don't let other people put their limitations on you. You know, don't, like, just because someone else says, oh, like this thing doesn't exist, or you can't do that, or like, just, you know, and I mean, like, hear some of it, hear some of the feedback, hear the, like, the why, and, you know, what you need to work on, but, you know, be like, kind of dare to dream bigger. Like, and that's one of the things I always talk about too, is like, you know, if your dream, first of all, if your dream is something that other people can understand, you've probably set it too low. Like, if other people can make sense of it, like, yes, you can do that, but you could probably do something even bigger. And you know, and going along with that, I think, like, if your dream doesn't scare you, like, it should almost terrify you. You know what I mean? And if it doesn't, it's like, you know, I think it's just how I'm wired, and maybe it's not for everybody, but you ask, like, how have I worked with, you know, people, the coaches I've worked with, and that's where I've challenged them. That's where I've, you know, it's not just like, oh, go be the director for a basketball program or NBA team, or the director of an entire department, or, you know, it's like, how could you, like, yeah, sure, go and do that. But then along the way, how can you leverage that and everything that you're learning, everything that maybe sport is giving to you, strength and conditioning, basketball, you know, whatever it may be, how can you leverage what you're learning, leverage those relationships, to think outside the box and kind of do something even bigger. So I think for me, it's been, you know, continually seeking out and surrounding myself with excellence, you know, so seeking out people who are just, you know, passionate, driven, talented, world-class, you know, hungry, voracious sort of learners, and surrounding myself with people like that to learn from them. It's, you know, I read all the freaking, like, I live probably the most boring life ever, because I just, like, read and I journal and I, you know, but so I'm constantly trying to learn and inform my thought process. And then through that, a big part of it is, like, I'm constantly trying to learn. Like, one of the things that drove me all along at Purdue, one of the things that drives me now at Future, is I'm spending all my time trying to learn, how can I better support, serve, and empower, you know, at Purdue, it was my players. How can I unlock their greatness and their potential, and build confidence in them, and, you know, work on some of the psychology in that. And at Future, it's, how can I unlock, you know, our team and our culture, and individually people to dream and, you know, sort of think bigger. And, you know, through that, I think that's been the thing that has motivated me along the way, as you said, is, you know, my, you know, even again, going back to, shoot, even at Wisconsin, when I was a student assistant, we had, because I was in a unique spot where they empowered me. They gave me the responsibilities to actually lead several teams. It would never happen today. In fact, people would get fired. But back then, they gave me as much responsibility as I showed, you know, I was capable of. And so low key, even as a student, I sort of had, like, interns almost working for, because I would lead different teams, and then there'd be interns supporting. So even I had some of them where I've been able to help impact their journey and help them get to like the next step in their career path. Same thing with the Bulls, you know, with some interns that we had there where I was able to help them get, you know, either assistant NBA positions or head college basketball. And then my first year at Purdue, my assistant that year was Nicodemus Christopher. And, you know, he was a younger coach we both were. I think I was 27, he was 24. At the end of that year, he became the director of men's basketball for Tennessee with Konzo Martin. And he's been now everywhere. Konzo, the first hire Konzo's made everywhere he's gone has been Nicodemus. And now he's at Missouri. And, you know, Nick's one of the if not the best in college basketball. The year after that, his brother, Gary Christopher, was my assistant. At the end of that year, he got the director job at Vanderbilt. He's now at Pittsburgh. Again, he's up there, one of the best. The next year or next 2 years, my assistant, Gavin Roberts, now he's the one who replaced me at Purdue. And he's doing a way better job than probably I ever could have if I stayed there. You know, he's just, and then my assistant after that, John Brinson, actually, I convinced him to join me with Future very early on and help and together kind of build this. And he's one of our managers now. And so that's the thing that motivates me, is seeing their growth and you know, that's what drives me to have a bigger platform to kind of help lift and sort of inspire, you know, many more people.
No, I completely agree. So I'm gonna go off cue here a little bit, off the questions, because something I'm passionate about, but I can tell you are as well. I love the color outside the lines, you know, innovation, like think outside the box. You know, when I did this podcast, and we'll get down to the question at some point, but you know, the question of where do you see this field going, or how could you see it progressing? One of the big things for me when I stepped into it was I was always asking the questions of the kind of the why. For getting my doctorate, we had to do research, and so it forces you into the why.
Oh yeah.
And a lot of the times, the answers I got were, "Well, we've always done it that way." Conditioning, right? Oh, well, the coach before me did it that way. I don't know. That's why we do it, you know? And so I think you're spot on that we are progressing at a rapid speed. And like Future, I loved your pitch on y'all's company. Like it could change the world. And I think that there's a lot of things like that out there in the approach that strength and conditioning is going. And you know, I think on Instagram or social media, you see all these strength coaches doing these, you know, Bosu ball, single leg barbell squat. Like, why in the heck is that dude doing that? Now, if that athlete is actually in that position of some sort, like, hey, rock on. But my point in that, though, is like people are pushing boundaries. And so I think people like yourself, I think it's awesome that you are driven that way, but also motivating your staff. So I think for the listeners who are trying to get into this field, I think that is a really important thing. And again, as kind of on myself, I branched off into the tactical community, but in doing the same thing. And I think that the more people that we have out there pushing those boundaries is going to grow.
In that world that you're in too, I mean, and obviously you can speak to this much better, but elite military is insane because they did realize, and now what would this be, like maybe 7 to 10 years ago is when they kind of finally realized inside of elite military that the way that we've always been doing it doesn't cut it, you know? And so that's where I think you still like more broadly, you still see this, there's still the stereotype of like the boot camp and even like you're seeing it come to team sports now, where all these team sports, they're like doing this 3-day like mental toughness with Navy SEALs or whatever. And they're like crawling through sand and jumping, and you're like, come on, you know, but it's like elite military 7 to 10 years ago made a decision that we have to get really intelligent about optimizing, you know, and pushing the limits and the boundaries of human performance, because I think they realize, you know, maybe for the first time, at least their actions speak to it as though it's the first time. But they realize that like your elite snipers, your elite, Navy SEALs or Green Beret, whatever it might be, are just like, an NBA player.
Yep,
they're the top 1% of the top 1% of the top 1% in the world. So it's like, you can't afford to get it wrong with them,
right,
and like break them. You can't just replace them, and like I've heard some stories from people in similar line as you, of like elite snipers, where part of their training, even like they're teaching them how to on command drop their resting heart rate to like 20 beats per minute, or like in the teens, so that they can pull the trigger in between heartbeats. It's just like stuff at that level, and the level at which you're applying technology, and in such a short time, because they committed all those resources in terms of, obviously they have the capital, they can throw billions of dollars at it, and the people, but they overtook elite sport in like a 3 to 5 year time span, because they decided. And I think that's where we're learning a lot of it from now, is it's like Aura Ring, like that technology came from elite military, and it's probably the best out there as it relates to, our sleep tracking and stuff like that. So it's, I mean, it's incredible, to your point, where it's all going now.
Yeah. And I tell a lot of my teams this, because again, if it's not broke, don't fix it, is a lot of what I get. And a lot of them just don't understand that injury rates could be a lot less, where your government funding is going. And I don't want to go off on that full rabbit trail, but one of the big things I give them is, hey, Tom Brady, whether you agree or don't agree, greatest quarterback of all time, right? Is he building his own workout program? No, he's got a professional that is crushing it. And so they should have that same. Now, to spin that, because I don't want to go down my side, but I think to the civilian sector, to your clients currently with Future, like they have that within their reach now. Instead of having to go figure out some workout, and commonly, knowing the injury background from the physical therapy side, it's high, over 50% of injuries are overuse. It's the inappropriate volume or intensity. Having a well-rounded program that I have no doubt y'all are putting out, I guarantee you, y'all could even spit out injury rates that are increasing rapidly. And so, I think that innovation is just, we're flying. And I think it's so good for the industry. Fitness is one of the fastest growing industries in the market. I do want to speak on two people. One you brought up, the other one I'm cheating a little bit because I saw on your LinkedIn. But,
of course.
So Cal Dietz, I like some of his mindsets and approaches. So that's baller. Because I think he's pushed the limits for a while.
Oh God, yes, amazing.
So I think that's awesome. You're under him. But the other one, you're either linked in with either Matt Ray or David Ballou. I can't remember which one, and I don't know how much you know them. Matt Ray or David Ballou.
Oh yeah. Matt. We don't actually know each other, but like I've been following Matt since he was at IMG. He worked with actually my brother-in-law worked there with him. And
cool.
I remember him like talking about the stuff Matt and David were doing there, because they had, and they have the best of the best high school football players there at IMG. This before they went to Notre Dame or anything like that. And the thing he always talked about, he was like, man, what they're doing with, kind of monitoring everything and adjusting and really auto-regulating throughout, and just the approach. He was like, we've had zero soft tissue, non-contact injury. Like their, player availability was just absolutely off the charts. And like guys are getting faster in season, and like they have the data to show that guys are getting faster in season. And so, it's funny because I'm a huge fan of everything that they've done. And I think, I've tried to, I'm nowhere near as smart as those guys. And like Matt is a PhD, but I think in my, maybe like approach for dummies, so to speak, I was trying to do a lot of that same stuff at Purdue, where like, every single time, like our entire off season revolved around speed development, and every time, like all of our training was testing. We use force plates within our training, not just testing. We use, contact mats, we use electronic timing gates. Every single rep that we ran of anything was on a timing gate, you know, and then it was all adjusted based off of that, you know, and then we're doing that in season. We were doing speed work, you know, in season, which at the time, like nobody was. And now you see it because of people like Matt and Tony Holler is someone who I love and admire everything he's doing and he's been doing for however many years at the high school level, but now he's getting it out there more broadly where it's challenging how people are thinking. And that's something like you mentioned, you know, Cal is definitely at the forefront at a lot of that, of like pushing the boundaries, you know, on some like crazy stuff too.
I love the foot touches the ground, the only thing touching the ground and from the foot up concept. Like it's really, you know, and so where I'm kind of running with this based off our questions is kind of where do you continue your learning, but also I think for listeners of, you know, where I do, but where you do, where I think something important that people can go start looking at, like, how are people pushing the boundaries? And so that's where I kind of brought these guys up, because I do think, like I said, Matt Rea, Cal Dietz, you've named off just a ton of strength coaches that hopefully people are going and checking out, because a lot of them post on Instagram or, you know, LinkedIn articles, and it's not always the recipe, but they give you an understanding. And then we should be out, kind of what you're talking about. The dummy version, make it your version.
Right.
You know, go find it out, man. Like, and so I think that's awesome. That's awesome. So where do you see the industry as far as continuing to push the needle? Like, where do you feel like we can continue to go upwards?
Well, first, actually, let me kind of echo one thing that you said, because I think like one of the things that really stalls our industry from moving forward is, and you see it most prominent on social media, it's all like the bashing of each other, of like, I believe this, so I believe this person, you know, like whatever, maybe this person in your mind, like they're doing something you believe to be stupid. Like there's probably something you can learn from it. Like there's, you know, and like, again, there's not just one way. And so it's like some of that of like, you know, like, do we Olympic lift? Do we not? Do we, you know, all this, and it's like, who can, like, learn from it, what works for you, apply it, but like, don't be so quick to just bash something. And that was something I learned very early on from Cal. Is Cal, like, honestly, Cal would look at something like that, like somebody doing some crazy thing on, I don't know, a stability ball or whatever, and he would first try to understand like what potentially could be a benefit of that. You know what I mean? And I think too often we just jump into like, just, oh, this is stupid, you know? And I still remember one of the things when I was with Cal, because being with him, I mean, it's like being with a mad scientist. Like you just, his brain runs wild. He's on a whiteboard, and you sit back and
stand back,
try to like keep up. Just, everything's going like, and you just, you know, you try and catch a couple nuggets as you can. But I remember, you know, and this would have been almost 15 years ago, like 2007. And he was talking to me about, I forget what the thing even was, but there were these crazy articles about some dude from the Soviet Union come over to Georgia, and he was doing this like quote unquote training where he developed this machine. It had this thing, like you would stand in the machine almost in like a good morning type position, and it had this like band that went over like your hips and low back, and then it was just strictly an isometric, and this guy was having like, be like a 70-year-old woman would have like 1,000 pounds and just hold this isometric for, you know, 30 seconds or something crazy. And it was the most like voodoo doctor type of, you know, like, what is this? And the article talked about, you know, these pro athletes who like their squat had gone up, you know, some crazy like 100 pounds in 4 weeks time. And these people with lifelong chronic back issues, all of a sudden went away doing this. And most people, and even myself at the time, I would have read that article and be like, this dude's a kook. Like, what, you know, what is this? But Cal was like, how could that work? And Cal's big thing that he always taught me was, and he always talks about like, he doesn't really talk about an athlete. He talks about the organism, like the organism, you know? And so it's all about stress and adaptation. And so that's immediately where his mind went, was like, well, if you did that and like an 80-year-old woman has 1,000 pounds, first of all, like that's insane. I don't care how you cut it, that like she's supporting 1,000 pounds or like whatever. It was some insane number. And he was just like, well then, and it led him like almost this first principles thinking of like asking yourself why 5 times and starting from the root of it. And it was like, okay, well, you know, if you were doing that, then what would be the stress that you're placing on the body? And then based on that stress, what's the adaptation? And he took it down this whole path of the hormonal response and yada, yada, yada. And so fast forward, he actually found a way to mimic the same thing. Of course he did. Use force plates and all these bands like attached on the pins of a squat rack. He'd set it to your position and he'd have you get under there and bring it over your hips. And just, so he had me do this. And this was back at a time when I was actually like training. So I was respectably strong back then. I was never like, you know, strong, but I was respectable, you know. Now I'm just weak shell of myself. But he had me just go, I think it was like 15 or 20 seconds on each leg. I was literally like the next 4 days, I was sore from just like hold it, you know what I mean? But it was just like, even that, like, you know, I share that story as kind of a microcosm of most people would just immediately look at that thing and be like, this guy's a kook. And Cal, who's, I mean, Cal's forgot more than any of us probably actually know, you know, I mean, just insane. But it's like, that's how he got there. You know, it's just like, he's looking for what's the opportunity to learn in there.
No, man, and I'm glad that you circled back to that, because 100%. So I've used the same concept bugs me as well, because I call them camps. So you have a Cal Dietz camp, you have a Matt Rea camp, you have a somebody else camp. And if you aren't in that camp, then everything else is wrong. Or if you are in that camp, everything else is wrong. Right. And I hate that method because I think that you're losing out on so much. And same thing, like I highly respect Cal Dietz. However, I would bet you money there's probably something he's wrong about. I don't know what it is, but you know,
we all are. So no, I mean, we all are. And it's your situation, your environment. So, you know, and that was one of the things I always said, like at Purdue, because, you know, I think that's another thing that you find at times with our industry is like people guard what they do as though it's some precious secret. And that's something I learned from Al and Eric early on with the Bulls. They're like, anything people are recycling as new today, that existed in like the early 1900s, the 1800s, you know, it's like nothing's new, you know, you're just bringing a new twist to it or whatever it is. But the bigger thing is like, there are no secrets. Whatever you do is not a secret. And in fact, if I gave you the exact playbook of everything that we did at Purdue to a T, and you just tried to cookie cutter copy that to your environment, it would probably fail. Because if I were in your environment, I wouldn't necessarily do the same thing. Just as, you know, and my background and my approach, you know, my approach, maybe it works a little different because of that. Maybe, and I play to my strengths. I stay away from, you know, so it's like, how we move forward is moving away from this idea that like we have these, you know, these guarded secrets, and being open and sharing with one another to be able to collaborate and build from each other. Like, you know, both in the NBA, but then especially college basketball in the Big Ten. Some of my biggest mentors, some of the people that, you know, I would learn from and also share ideas with the most are the people that we're competing with every year for conference championships. But you know what? Our program got better as a result of being open to share. I got better, you know, as a result, you know? And so it's just, you know, I think that's a big thing in our industry, is just being open to share and, you know, help other people along. Cause it's good for everybody. It's good for the whole.
Definitely. No, I think you're spot on. So, well, good. We've definitely crushed, you know, kind of, I hope someone who's entering this field, they should have a wealth of knowledge we just dumped, that I think we've covered that. Let's go back to, and again, you can talk on future or, you know, back to your time working with, you know, elite athletes, but How would you create buy-in in your athletes? I know you've talked about color outside the line,
Yeah.
but maybe more like X's and O's even of,
Yeah.
are you I would doubt, but scream in their face, you go buddy up and be like, hey man, you can do this. Like, so kind of what you
Yeah.
thought there.
Yeah. I mean, it's, you got to adapt to the situation and the individual, and that moment, and so there's so many factors that play into it, because there's the psychology of it all, there's the emotional state, there's the, like, where are we, maybe in the season, what's going on in terms of success and failure, collectively, individually, um, pattern of behavior. I think you got to factor in what is somebody's pattern of behavior, like, and so, say for instance, like maybe a player, um, lashes out, and they just, do something that would be perceived as like, this is disrespectful, inappropriate, like whatever. But it's someone you've coached for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and this is completely out of character for them, and it doesn't fall in line with a consistent pattern of behavior. You could take one approach and be like, puff up and make it about you and make it about ego, and like, oh, you disrespected me, you don't speak to me like that, as and it's like, at the end of the day, there's no, like, we're human beings, like, forget your and that's why I always talk about, even with, quote unquote, my assist, like Nicodemus, Gary, Gavin, JB, I always made sure, like, it was like, that's my co-head, like, they don't work for, like, we work with each other, and same with the players, like, they don't work for me, like, we work, if anything, I work for them, and same with my assistants. So I think that's the core of it, is it's the humility, and it's building relationships. I also, like, I don't know, I'm a little different. I don't love the concept of buy-in. I think it's about trust and it's relationship, because also buy-in implies that, like, I'm right, and that, like, I know best and I know what's best for, this guy or this other person. Which, I think in some cases is true, but at the same time, even like training our players at Purdue, I'm not physically in their body. Like, I can't feel what they feel. I don't know the emotions that they're going through. I don't know, any of that. And so I think it's about, what people talk about as buy-in is really, relationship and trust. And through that, it's a partnership. That's why I don't believe it's buy-in, because buy-in is more, not necessarily even to the extreme of like, like being a dictator, so to speak. But buy-in makes it more of like, you're doing things my way.
I agree.
And I think ultimately, to get what's optimal for each individual, it's through forming that partnership and building that trust. And through that process, I think where you come in as a coach is, to constantly, think about, like, educating and empowering, if it's a player, your athlete, educate them on the why, you're doing different things. And also, like, and that can be uncomfortable at times, because, like, you're going to find out real quick whether you understand the why, so it's like, you've been to a conference or you saw, oh, Cal Dietz is doing triphasic and everybody's doing triphasic now, so we're doing triphasic. And then all of a sudden you try to explain it to a player, and it turns out, like, you're like, I don't know, like, and but I think that's the other thing too, is having humility. Like, there were things that we did at Purdue where I would tell guys, I'm like, hey, honestly, I don't know if this will work. Like, it's a little crazy, but here's my thought process. Hear me out on my thought process. Here's kind of my theory. Like, one of the things I think back to my very first year towards the tail end of the season is when we started introducing quarter squats for the very first time, from the pins. And we would have guys, we had guys, ultimately by the end of my time, I had every single one of my guys could quarter squat 300 kilos plus for 5 reps and just, own it. But we had guys even as high as, I guess it would have been like 330 kilos, so up over 700
Yeah.
pounds, like for reps.
Yeah.
And but even how we started was like, I was like, part of it was Dr. Greg Half, who's a mentor of mine through Edith Cowan. He and his wife, Erin Half, who are like, just off the charts. And so they'd kind of directed me down this path. I experimented it, on myself a little bit. But even with that, like my first few athletes who I had do it, I'd done it on myself for like 6 weeks to get a feel for it. And then with them, I kind of talked through like, hey, let's try this. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's why I think it'll help you. And, and I made them a partner in that. But I also had the humility there to not act as though like, I knew everything. It's like, we're going to try this, whatever. And so I think, over time, as you do that, over time, as you empower, you educate, you involve that player in the decision-making process as they understand, how their body, because each one of your players is going to respond a little bit differently to the type of training based on their fiber typing, their metabolic typing, their emotional state, their hormonal, like there's so many variables.
Tons of variables. Yep.
And so I think the more you start to involve them, the more you start to educate them, then over time you can start to actually allow them to make their own decisions. So like for us over time, like by my last, especially my last like 3-ish years at Purdue, and more so in season, because out of season, I didn't care about like I would get on our guys if they were doing recovery stuff. Like if they got in a cold tub or they were using, like, we're not playing a game for 6 months. Like, what are you recovering for? Like we're going to be beat up and broken down. And through that, you're going to adapt to the response to higher, bigger capacities, bigger work, all this in season. And that's something I really learned from Cal very early on. But then in season, you got to be, it's like now you got to be that sniper and hit the target from 2 miles away with every variable. And so how we were able to do that, especially the last 3 years, was like, it turned from actually, because we didn't have any team lifts in season. I put it on our guys to be pros. I put it on our guys to be responsible, to be adults. Like the thing we always talked about was, you give me, consistency and frequency, I'll give you flexibility and choice. If I'm having to chase you down to take care of, the things that you need to take care of, then like I'm going to dictate a little bit more. But as long as you're responsible about it, and what it turned into was like, a lot of our guys would come in and train anywhere from 4 days to 7 days a week in season, like starters, big minute players, because there was always something that we could do to move them forward. But the other part of it was when they came in, the conversation evolved from, how do you, how are you feeling? What do you feel like doing today?
Right.
And we build from there to, especially my last couple of years in season, it became straight up, how are you feeling? What are you going to do today? And my players would tell me, like, that sounds crazy, but my players would tell me what they were going to do today. And then we'd still have a conversation, because then I'd be like, I like that, but let's consider this, what we have coming up or whatever.
So go into a little more,
their choice.
So go into a little more detail for me, because that's really interesting to me. That's an area definitely, I don't do that. That would be difficult. It's just because I don't mean it bad, but sometimes I have a struggle with, well, they don't quite understand all the X's and O's. Even when I educate, there's a lot of missing information they don't have. So how much of a choice are you giving them? Like squat versus deadlift, like rep schemes? What kind of choices?
Everything. I mean, honestly,
like
everything.
Create your own workout? That's interesting.
But they understood, because, you got to think about it. It's years that we've been together. We also built a program to where the veteran players are educating along with me. They're educating, our incoming freshmen. Our incoming freshmen are learning over time, and there's some foundational things that we would do where it was like, typically we're either gonna, be pulling like some type of hinge pattern, and then everything that falls within that structure, or we're going to be doing more of a squat pattern or something that falls within that structure. So they understood kind of the skeleton of like, you know, if I pulled last time, I'm going to do some type of squat here.
Yeah.
There was also a, you know, and especially in season, it was like, you know, is this an opportunity for us to load and chase and preserve strength a little bit? Or is this, you know, a time where let's focus more on the velocity end of the spectrum? So they understood those things as well. And they understood, you know, when I've felt how I feel right now, because they've tried different things. Because to get there, I had them try different solutions to the same, you know, feelings of soreness or fatigue, or they had a lot of energy, or, you know, we're a day out from the game, or it's 30 minutes before tip. Because, you know, if it was game day, we would have 2/3 to sometimes 100%. But typically it was at least like 2/3 of our guys would come up in the weight room and do something on game day right before, you know, within anywhere from 2 hours to 1 hour, you know, before tip. And so they understood, because also we would take the opportunities of, you know, our games early in the season where we're playing, you know, and no disrespect, but like we're playing a, you know, a low major team. It's like, honestly, if we lose this game because, you know, whether you're sore or whether like we trained before, like we have much bigger problems. So like they've learned this over time to where they start to understand like, man, I'm pretty beat up and sore, but I'm not so sore that I can't do anything. And in fact, if I do light and fast here, if I focus on like I want to snatch, I want to do some assisted batten jumps. And then when I get into my squats, we'll just go light. But we'll throw the, you know, the Tendo, the gym aware on there, and just, you know, we're going to hit triples and just speed and pair that with the depth jump. Like they started to understand how their body responded to that. And so the conversations that we would have became higher level, where it was like, you know, for instance, like a guy might come in and they're like, man, actually, I'm feeling really good today. Josh, can we reverse band squat? Like, I want to go heavy. And, you know, that's where I might talk them through to be like, hey, you know, actually, like, we really haven't gone heavy with you. And, you know, it's been probably close to 3 weeks now. So we can go heavy, but understand as you're like throwing more weight on, like you're going to be sore regardless. So especially if you're pushing the weight a bit more, like you're really going to be sore. And then, you know, I think the thing that created is it tapped into the psychology of both intent and choice. And the stress environment it creates internally in terms of hormonal, because it wasn't me going like, hey, load more weight on. It was them going, I'm going to throw another 10 kilos on each side. And I'm like, all right, just remember, like, you're going to be sore tomorrow, you know? And then the next day we're having a warm up, and the guy comes over and he's like, man, Josh, like, I'm freaking so, you know, but they also learn their lesson through that as well. There's also like, you know, I think what happens on the other side is like, if I'm prescribing the weights for them and it's going against what they believe is going to help them, it creates a different stress response. And I think too often we discount, like I'm big on all of like Robert Sapolsky's work in particular, like Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers and Behave, of just how powerful the psychological is in driving the physiological. And so, you know, I think our program became, and the reason why we had so much success, so in 7 seasons, we had collectively across every single player we ever had in our program, 6 games missed in 7 seasons due to non-contact soft tissue injuries out of 2,511 game opportunities. So literally 99.8% player availability. And the thing I always say, and maybe I'm discounting it a little too much, but honestly, I think it had nothing to do with the X's and O's. It had nothing to do with me. In fact, I look at it often and I go, you know, if I wasn't in their way, would we have had 0? Like instead of 6, it would have been 0 if I wasn't there. You know, it's kind of how I look at it. But I believe the reason why we had success is because our guys, they believed in what we were doing. They believed that it was going to help them. And I think they believed it because they were involved. We were partners in the decision.
Yeah.
And I would defer to them at times. They would defer to me at times.
Right.
And so with that, I think there was so much more intent behind everything that they did because it was their choice. And I think, again, with your physical therapy background, I think obviously you've studied a lot of the what is it, biosocial, psychological,
and true,
placebo.
But yeah,
all of
essentially you hit the nail on the head though. You're right. Like even research wise, medicine, people, their bodies can heal if they believe whatever they're doing, placebo or a real thing, it will heal. And the mind is so strong.
I think there's other things too where people overlook because it's like you want to be so focused on the X's and O's, which is still such a small piece of the pie of what you can even control. I remember like even with some of my assistants and people who had interned with us, we would have days, especially in season, where a guy would come in and there were certain days where I almost let it just be like a free for all for them. But because what I saw was when they walked in, they, again, pattern of behavior. Their head was down, their shoulders were slumped, they're walking very slow. They're like clearly, either mad at the world, depressed, whatever, any one of these things. And so all I would do, my sole goal for that session was by the time they leave, I don't care what happens in the 20 minutes or 40 minutes or however much time they're in here. I could care less. Do not care what they do. So long as when they walk out of the door, they're walking out of the door. Now they're upright. They have a pep to their step. They're laughing. They're smiling. I think we talk so much about even like sleep as a recovery modality that people miss out on. And you've, especially your background, I know you've done a ton of this. Laughter. Like laughter is one of the most powerful recovery modalities that we have at our disposal. And so that was even one of the things where it was like, we'd have guys come in at times and I just let them, typically I wouldn't have guys like using strength machines or, doing a bunch of bicep curls or, whatever. I just kind of let them do their thing, crank the music, try and, shoot the breeze with them a little, mess with them, try to get them to cheer up a little. And that was the sole goal. And it was funny because I'd have, other coaches looking at me, they're like, Josh, what the heck? They just thought I was like the worst coach ever. And I was like, you're missing the whole picture. Today did not matter at all what they did. It was about the outcome of driving their recovery,
Yep. No, I think you're spot on. It's I don't think it's Pavlov. Was it Maslow? Hierarchy of needs?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's that same concept.
Exactly.
If you expect them to come in and just bust it and increase performance, but they don't have a house or they don't have food, they're not getting sleep, those higher level needs,
exactly,
you're wasting your time.
Exactly.
And that's so like that's a really cool concept. Yours is pretty extreme, but I think it's hard to argue though. In 5 seasons, 2,500 games, 6. Like that's very hard to argue with. Sorry, 7. 7 seasons. Anyway, point being, like that's hard to argue with. And so I think that's, again, something really cool. Yeah, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate the time. I hope that the listeners that are growing into the field, I hope they got something out of this. I hope that even for myself, man, I loved hearing all of it. You're crushing it. You have crushed it. I've learned a lot. I think it's super cool, and good luck to you. And with future, is there anything else you'd like to add as we finish this up for future, or whatever you'd like to pitch to kind of find you and look you up, stuff like that?
Yeah, no. So I've been trying to be a lot more active recently, especially with Twitter at J Bonhotal. Go on there, follow me. I've been trying to get more active, sharing, a lot of the lessons I've learned, both on the performance side, but, also in kind of making, this pretty unique, crazy pivot from being in the sports world to a startup, and lessons of failure, lessons of success. So trying to share, a lot more on there. We're also, we're growing like crazy at Future in terms of our coaches. So, we're probably hiring, 500 plus coaches just inside of this next year, all salaried positions. Our team is absolutely incredible. We have people that come from NBA, NHL, college, high level private. I mean, just amazing resources internally. So, anybody that's interested in working with us and helping us build this, future.co is our website. So you can find out a little bit more. You can look at our coaches, future.co/coaches, and see the people that, you'd be able to work together with every single day, learn from, share with. And then, our job is posted right there on the website as well. So you can apply right there.
Awesome. Yeah, man. I think what y'all are doing is super cool. I'm sure, I don't doubt, hopefully y'all get calls, and at worst case, people go look at what you guys have going on. Cause I think it's innovative, and I think it's where the world is going. You're always going to need people on the other side of both screens, I guess. But regardless, it's super cool. So again, Josh, really appreciate it. Thanks for the time, man.
Yeah, no, likewise. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Good deal. We'll talk soon. Have a good one.
All right, brother.
See ya.